So if you pay attention to politics like I do, chances are you've been hearing a lot about the recent economic success of Germany. Why? Well, several reasons. One, Germany has continuously dropping unemployment even while the EU has increasing unemployment, and their unemployment rate is even lower than what it is here in the US. Manufacturing jobs are much more common in Germany than they are here in the US, and the best part is Germany has a growing trade surplus while the United States has been having a growing trade deficit. So now what's happening is people are debating over whether or not left-wing or right-wing policies led to Germany's rapid economic growth. And so far, it appears that the left has an early lead. Check out this article from the Union Review, Labor Movement News and Views. Germany, with a 6% unemployment rate, relatively low by economic measures both in Europe and the USA, has found that strengthening unions is an important way of reducing unemployment. It is also an important policy for reducing economic inequality. The New York Times on June 8th reported on the German economy stated, Germany, with its 6% unemployment rate against the US 14%, which never happened, enacted policies based on strengthening and building unions as a way of increasing consumer spending through higher wages paid to union workers. Thus, this policy reduces unemployment by increasing workers' purchasing power. Thus, keeping unions strong reduces unemployment because higher wages which unions secure increase purchasing power and in turn accelerate the need for more workers in manufacturing and service jobs. Emulating Germany's economic policy is a sound way to go. Oh, wow! Oh, that sounds great! Oh, geez, I wonder how much wages have gone up in Germany this past decade. 20%? 10%? Negative 10%? Yeah, there's a little bit more to this story. According to every source in the galaxy, wages have gone down in Germany this past decade. Even more than they've gone down here. Let's take a look at the facts, shall we? Changes in EU employee compensation. The German Federal Statistics Office and DIW Berlin. They have Germany all the way at the bottom in terms of wage growth at a 10% decline in the pre-crisis years of 2000 to 2008. This graph has a bit rosier numbers. It has Germany having wages going down about 5%, but it has America with its own about 15% in wage growth. How about that? Real wages in Germany. Numerous years in decline. German Institute for Economic Research and DIW Berlin. Net real wages in Germany have hardly risen since the beginning of the 1990s. Between 2004 and 2008, they even declined. This is a unique development in Germany. Never before has a period of rather strong economic growth been accompanied by a decline in net real wages over a period of several years. German wages lost decade. The 2000s were a lost decade for German wage earners. In fact, real gross wages actually declined by 4% during the 10-year period, according to a study by Hans Blockler Foundation. That has been a disaster for German workers who have seen their living standards eroded. World Socialist website. Oh, well, if the socialists don't care for it, then you know this labor union stuff is crap. Sharp decline in income of German low-wage earners. In his analysis, Grogpa concluded that employees in lower income groups have suffered heavy losses. Their income has declined by between 16 and 22% during the last 10 years. Those workers with so-called mini-jobs, who in 2000 had a real net monthly income of 270 euros, received just 211 euros, or nearly 22% less last year. Those earning 835 net euros in 2000, for example, sales staff, assistant handicraft workers, employees in call centers, and security services, made just 705 euros, or 16% less in the year 2010. What Germany is experiencing is a phenomenon I call the quantity demanded paradox. Here's how it goes. People demand more of something. The price will go up. The price of something goes up. People will demand less of that. Therefore, the more people demand, the less they buy. What? Okay. The problem here is people often confuse an increase in demand with an increase in quantity demand. If you know the basic laws of supply and demand, you know about the demand curve. It's the relationship between how much people will buy of something at any given price. A shift in the demand curve means that at any given price, people will now buy more of it, or people will buy that quantity at a new higher price. Germany is not experiencing a shift in the demand curve. There's no increasing demand for workers that they didn't have before. What's happening is they're experiencing a shift in the quantity demanded of workers because changes in the labor market, particularly labor market reforms, which I'll talk about later, have basically made workers cheaper and working hours much more flexible. So let's discuss a brief the history of Germany so we can understand what's actually been happening over this past decade. Okay, first things first. Germany did not have a housing bubble, unlike almost every other country on this planet. This is a chart of changes in house prices across the OECD. As you can see, the UK, Spain, the United States, Canada, Norway, Sweden, they all saw like an 80% increase in house prices. But as you can see, over this past decade, house prices in Germany have actually gone down. So their situation is not the same as the rest of the world. And yet, despite the fact that they didn't have a housing bubble, they managed to have 11% unemployment in 2005. How did a country with no housing bubble manage to get unemployment that high in 2005? Well, that's another long story. Okay, so here's a longer history of Germany. After World War II, in the 50s and 60s, Germany went through a golden age of prosperity called Wirtschaftswunder. It's German for the economic miracle. It's Germany's equivalent of our post-war economic boom. But it was even more prosperous than our own was. In the 1960s, unemployment in Germany got to be as low as 0.8%, and wages grew at a rate of 4.6% a year. The United States cannot hold a candle to either one of these two numbers. But just like the post-war economic boom, Wirtschaftswunder came to an end. In the mid-70s, unemployment in Germany started going up. But unlike the United States, where unemployment goes up and down and up and down and up and down, unemployment in Germany would go up, say, 3 percentage points, and then it would go down maybe 1, and then go up 3, and then down 1. Every single time unemployment in Germany went down, it went down to a high that was higher than the previous low. So it just kept plateauing and going up and up and up, and it basically just looks like a staircase, just up, up, and up. Until finally, in 2005, it got to be as bad as 11%. So there was no humongous recession that triggered this 11% unemployment. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse as Germany just kept falling off this cliff. This type of unemployment is called structural unemployment. It's not caused by a drop in short-term spending, so stimulus packages really don't help. The way you would fix structural unemployment is by doing labor market reforms, and that's what Germany's been doing for the last 30 or 40 years. A lot of people are aware that Europeans work a lot fewer hours than Americans are, and they always tout this as like the greatest thing ever. Like, oh, we Americans are being worked to death by the rich, and it's all part of income inequality, while Europeans only work like 1,500 hours a year. Well, what many people don't realize is that Europeans used to work the same number of hours as Americans did. This is the Journal of Economic Perspectives, and it says that in 1973, Europeans worked 2% more hours than the average American. But 22 years later, in 1995, that was down to 24% less. It's gotten slightly better since then. So this whole idea of Europeans working much fewer hours than Americans is a relatively recent phenomenon. But what many people don't understand is that this is not done as an act of charity. Like, we love you guys so much, we're going to give you your own health care and free college, and we're going to cap how much you work. This was done to fight the kind of structural unemployment that Europe has been dealing with for the last 30 years. And it's absolutely been accompanied by a reduction in pay. So, let me give you a great example of how controversial this is, because it's not as wonderful as many people like you to believe. This is an article titled 35-Hour Work Week, Lower Incomes and More Work. It is written by a socialist who vehemently disagrees with this policy. Here's what he has to say. Collective working time reduction is being seen by many as an effective instrument to fight the madness of today's capitalism, which produces millions of unemployed while forcing those employed to work overtime. The demand for a radical working time reduction complements that for a guaranteed income, where leftist unionists and welfare politicians began to cooperate. Shorter working hours seemed a good idea to most, but the union slogan of working time reduction meets with deep mistrust amongst workers. Since the mid-'80s, it has been a crisis regulation mechanism in the hands of companies and unions, with workers experiencing double betrayal. Working time has not been reduced significantly, but the wages have gone down. It gives an example of Volkswagen. Back in the early 1990s, Volkswagen had 108,000 employees and wanted to get rid of 31,000 of them as demand for Volkswagens dropped. Instead, though, the unions and the company reached an agreement where instead of firing a bunch of people, they would reduce hours. And they reduced hours all the way down to 28.8 hours per week. Here's what it has to say about workers, though. Regular monthly wages stayed more or less the same. They had cuts in the yearly bonus payments, so the gross yearly wages dropped by 16%, 10% after taxes. The reason I'm using Volkswagen as an example is that the former president of Volkswagen was a man by the name of Peter Hartz, and he was eventually hired by the German government in 2003 to come up with a series of labor reforms to essentially establish the Volkswagen model to the German economy as a whole. So these reforms are called the Hartz reforms, and there's 4 basic reforms: Hartz 1, Hartz 2, Hartz 3, and Hartz 4, but Hartz 4 is by far the most controversial. So let me read to you a little bit about the Hartz 4 reforms from the Guardian website. The new element that brought the most profound change, Hartz 4, was the contract drawn up between the job seeker and the job center, which defined that each party promised to do to get the job seeker back on somebody's payroll. This was coupled with sanctions, in other words, benefit cuts, if the job seeker failed to keep up his or her side of the bargain. Unemployment, both long-term and short-term, has certainly dropped considerably in Germany since January 1st, 2003, but critics say that's only because most jobless people are forced to accept the next job that they can find, and often they end up in one so low-paid and part-time that they were still dependent on some sort of state welfare anyway. Then again, the flexibility that allows employers, especially major industrial companies, to take on and lay off part-time shift workers, depending on the state of the export market, has certainly helped Germany to ride out the global economic crisis in the past 3 years. So this Hartz 4 reform basically tied healthcare policies and unemployment benefits to things like Social Security, so that basically people on welfare had to find the next job. This is a photograph of some protesters protesting Hartz 4 reform, and it says, "Starvation wages and forced labor, we have had enough." Because people are forced into the next job they can find under Germany's Hartz reforms, the unemployment rate has dropped. But it's also forced people to accept lower paying jobs than they otherwise would because the welfare state has been removed around them. One of the things that the Hartz reform led to was the creation of so-called mini-jobs, which are jobs that pay very, very little money. And I actually have some articles that talk about this. This is Insight, Dark Side of Germany's Jobs Miracle. Anja has been scrubbing floors and washing dishes for €2 an hour over the past 6 years. She is bewildered when she sees newspapers hailing Germany's jobs miracle. "My company exploited me," says the 50-year-old, sitting in the kitchen of her small flat in eastern German town of Stralsund. "If I could find something else, I'd be long gone." Stralsund is an attractive seaside town, but Anja, who preferred not to use her full name for fear of being fired, cannot afford the quaint cafes. Wage restraint and labor market reforms have pushed the jobless rate down to a 20-year low, and the German model is often cited as an example for European nations seeking to cut unemployment and become more competitive. But critics say the reforms that helped create jobs also broadened the entrenched and low-paid and temporary work sector, boosting wage inequality. Labor office data show that the low-wage sector grew 3 times as fast as other employment in the 5 years to 2010, explaining why the jobs miracle has not prompted Germans to spend much more than they have in the past. Pay in Germany, which has no nationwide minimum wage, can go well below €1 an hour, especially in former communist East German states. I've had some people earning as little as 55 cents per hour, said Peter Hefken, the head of Strausson's job agency. Here's another article, Part-time Jobs Thriving. Mini jobs are a form of part-time employment which allows workers to earn up to €400 per month without having to pay taxes or Social Security. By the end of September 2010, more than 7.3 million German people were employed that way. For about 5 million of these people, mini jobs are their only employment. The remaining 2 million hold a mini job on the side, according to BA's quarterly statistics. It goes on. If a mini jobber were to seek regular employment, a sharp increase in taxes would quickly nullify any gains, according to Jacob. So this is what the Hartz reform did. They allowed people to essentially work really low-paying jobs tax-free in order to get them off welfare. And we've already read a previous article saying that these jobs are so low-paying that many people end up on welfare anyways. But it's had a negative effect on wage growth in the country. This is another article. It just says that the German economic miracle is not as impressive as it seems. And it says in 2000, Germans worked 57.7 billion hours. In 2010, the figure was about the same. This shows that work's just been shared out, with workers taking a hit on job security and pay. What's really amazing about this is that, contrary to the first article I read, unions have not been fighting this injustice tooth and nail. In fact, they've been fighting for it. And I have several quotes from socialists attacking unions. This is from that 35-hour work week article. The union's policy of work time reduction was capitalist crisis management. It didn't stop the intensification of exploitation, but on the contrary made it possible. This is from the article, Low Incomes Take the Hardest Hit. Germany's trade unions have actively supported this development. Not only did they sit on the commission headed by Volkswagen personnel chief Peter Hartz that prepared the cuts, they also boycotted the massive protest against the Hartz 4 reforms, which erupted in 2004. When Gragba says that the union should be encouraged in wage negotiations to campaign for higher pay, he is either misled or deluding himself. The unions are part of the conspiracy against employees. They have agreed to one contract after another that involves falling wages. The unions are not the victims of the shift of the balance of power to the detriment of workers, but rather one of its key organizers. And this is another article on the World Socialist website that says, 10 years since the Hartz 4 reforms, the union officials had no objection to a low-wage sector as long as their own positions and privileges in the factories remained untouched. In fact, they responded enthusiastically to proposals to reduce labor costs in order to strengthen the competitiveness of the German economy on the world export market. There you have it, folks. The key to Germans' low unemployment was creating these mini-jobs which pay almost nothing, which kick people off welfare benefits, and work incredibly low hours so that people can work bizarre shifts like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. That's the secret, and it's not as rosy as many people would have you believe.